The cold and blue pine range wasn't just a temperature. It was a presence. It seeped through layers, sank into bone, and whispered warnings through the trees. But Jake Renshaw had learned long ago not to flinch at it. Snow was just snow. Until it wasn't. Unit 27 responding. Heading toward North Trail Loop. Looks clear for now. Jake spoke into his radio, his breath a ghost in the frozen air. Axel, his K9 partner, stood steady in the back of the snowmobile, ears twitching, amber eyes scanning the trees like a second set of sensors. German shepherd, 5 years old. Combat tested. Loyal beyond reason. Copy, 27. Weather Service just issued a freeze warning. High winds incoming. Recommend you cut it short, came dispatch's reply. Cooper's voice. She was always watching out, always reading ahead of the storm. Jake keyed his mic again. 10-4. One last sweep. He wasn't the kind of officer who left things half-finished. Not when this stretch of mountain had taken lives before. He and Axel had pulled a missing hiker out of these woods last winter, half buried under snow. Another hour had nearly cost a man his life. No, Jake wasn't turning back yet. He pressed forward, engine humming low beneath him, the trail narrowing as tall pines closed in on either side. Snowflakes drifted lazily at first, then quicker, faster, like white sparks. Axel stayed silent, tense, watching. You see something? Jake asked, glancing back. Axel's nose lifted to the air, then turned. His body lowered into a crouch. Alert posture. Jake slowed the snowmobile. The trees were too quiet. No movement. No birds. Even the wind seemed to pause. And then static. His radio hissed and crackled. The line to dispatch suddenly a mess of white noise. He tried again. Unit 27. Do you read? Nothing. Jake frowned, reaching for the emergency antenna unit in the sled's side compartment. But before he could attach it, a branch cracked loudly behind them. Axel whirled. Jake turned, but too late. A sharp pain exploded at the base of his skull, and the world went white. He fell hard, snow rushing up to meet him, his body already numb from the cold. Axel barked, a loud, deep warning that turned to a snarl. More voices, muffled. Men, one of them cursed. Another said, "Just grab him. Get the dog, too." Axel's growl turned feral. Then a yelp, a scuffle, and then nothing. Darkness swallowed the forest. Jake lay motionless as boots crunched around him, voices faded, and the snowfall buried the scene like it never happened. Back at the station, the shift changed. The winds howled louder, and no one, not yet, knew that Officer Jake Renshaw had just vanished into the forest, except Axel. And somewhere out there, the dog was already fighting to get back. The storm hit harder than expected. By nightfall, blue pine was swallowed whole, trails gone, trees bowing under the weight of ice, and visibility reduced to barely the reach of a flashlight. What started as routine turned into lockdown. Patrols were called back. Chains were bolted across station doors. Only the comm stayed alive, voices buzzing in and out with weather updates and anxious check-ins. All except one. Unit 27, come in. Static. Sergeant Linda Cooper leaned over the dispatch console, fingers tapping rhythmically against her mug of black coffee gone cold. She'd tried Jake's line 12 times in the last hour. Nothing. Not a blip. Not even static anymore. Beside her, Deputy Morris shook his head. He probably lost signal near the ridge. That trail's a dead zone in weather like this. Cooper didn't respond. She knew Jake. If his comms went down, he'd switch to backup. And if backup failed, he'd turn around. That was the deal. That was the rule. And yet, nothing. Her eyes flicked to the tracker board. Jake's patrol was marked in red. Last ping timestamp 5 hours ago. The line just stopped. She pressed the mic again. Jake, this is Cooper. Storm's grounding all units. Respond immediately. Silence. And then, just before she could key the mic again, a sound split the air. A howl. Not from the speakers. Not from the wind. From outside. Raw. Desperate. A second later, it came again, closer. Cooper stood up so fast her chair hit the floor, behind her. She bolted to the station lobby, boots echoing against tile as she threw open the front doors. Snow spiraled in, stinging her skin, biting at her face. But she didn't flinch, because limping up the main path was a shape she recognized instantly. Axel, the German shepherd, was coated in snow, his coat thick with ice, his paws raw and bleeding from frostbite and broken terrain. But he didn't stop. He reached the porch steps, collapsed his haunches, and howled again. Louder, longer, painful. "Where's Jake?" Cooper whispered, kneeling in front of him. Axel stared at her, his entire body shaking, not from cold, but from urgency. His eyes locked with hers, wild and alert. He pawed at her leg, barked once, then turned back toward the forest, limping a few feet, looking over his shoulder. "Are you trying to lead me?" she asked, heart pounding. Moore had caught up, eyes wide. "What the hell, where's the officer?" Cooper didn't answer. She was already grabbing her coat. Axel barked again, sharp and insistent, snow swirling around him like smoke. "He came back," she whispered. But Jake didn't. That's when it sank in. Axel had made it through the storm. Alone, with torn pads, frozen fur, and miles of wilderness between him and the station. He hadn't run. He had returned. For help. And that meant only one thing. Jake was still out there. Somewhere. And Axel wasn't going to stop until they found him. By sunrise, the storm had softened into a slow, unforgiving hush. Snow clung to every surface like a second skin. The forest was silent. But at the Blue Pine Sheriff Station, the air buzzed with urgency. 2 snowmobiles, medical kit, sled trailer. "And I want eyes on that ridge," Sergeant Cooper barked, slapping a folded topographical map onto the hood of the department's SUV. "We're not waiting for this to become a recovery mission." Deputy Moore hesitated, bundling the gear. "You really think he's still alive?" Cooper looked down at Axel, who sat by her side, tail still, eyes locked on the distant tree line like it owed him an answer. "Yes," she said, "because that dog's not howling for a body." Axel had barely rested. No matter how many times the vet tech tried to wrap his paws or coax him to water, he resisted. The second Cooper walked back into the room, he sprang to his feet, limping in a tight circle, pawing at the door. He wanted out. He wanted back. She gave him what he wanted. Now. Strapped into a safety harness on the lead snowmobile, Axel leaned forward, ears perked, nose twitching in the cold air. As the engines revved and the forest opened in front of them, he didn't hesitate. He barked once, sharp, clear, directional. Cooper turned the handlebars. Axel led. They tore through the first few miles of trail, familiar terrain, places Jake should have passed on his route. But there were no tracks. The wind had erased everything. Still, Axel seemed to know. He sniffed, paused, turned east, off path. "Hold up." Mora called over the roar of the wind. "There's no trail that way." Cooper didn't stop. Then he made one. They followed Axel off the main ridge, down a slope blanketed so thick it looked untouched. But halfway down, Axel barked and jumped from the sled, nose deep in the snow. He began to dig frantically, snow flying in every direction. "What is it?" Cooper yelled, diving off her vehicle. She knelt beside him, buried beneath nearly a foot of snow, twisted metal and shattered plastic. Jake's patrol radio, the badge number still visible, frozen stiff. "Jesus," Moore whispered. He went down. Cooper's stomach turned, and no one saw it. Axel didn't wait. He was already pushing forward through the trees, limping but determined. His breath came in hard, visible bursts, his body driven by something deeper than training, something human. And then, after nearly another mile, he stopped, dead still. They had reached the edge of a ravine. At the bottom, covered in snow and shadowed by evergreens, was something none of them had expected. A narrow path, barely visible. And at the end of it, hidden behind thick trees and a crumbling slope, a cabin, small, sunken, half swallowed by ice. Axel stood at the ridge above it, tail rigid, eyes wide. He let out a low growl, then a single bark. The sound echoed like a shot. Cooper stared down at the cabin and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind, Why didn't this show on our maps? Mora asked, confused. It's not supposed to be there, Cooper replied. Axel barked again, louder, insistent. And in that moment she knew Jake wasn't just missing. He had been taken. And that cabin, it was never meant to be found. The door was chained shut. That was the first thing Cooper noticed as she and Mora crunched their way down the narrow path toward the sunken cabin. Rusted links twisted across the front like a warning, anchored to a bolt hammered into the old frame. The windows were boarded from the outside, the kind of ceiling done not to protect, but to imprison. Axel didn't bark this time. He paced in tight, anxious circles, his nose the seams of the wood, pawing at the base of the door with a whimper building in his throat. He's in there, Cooper whispered. Morris stepped forward, hand already reaching for the bolt cutters. Cooper's breath fogged in the cold. She scanned the perimeter. Whoever did this didn't want anyone getting in, or him getting out. The chain clattered as Mora cut it. One hard pull, and the door creaked inward. The smell hit first. Old sweat, mildew, blood, and something worse. Stale air that hadn't moved in days. Axel surged forward into the dark, his body low and searching. A whine escaped his chest, then silence. Cooper raised her flashlight, sweeping the beam across the interior. It landed on a shape, and the world stopped. "Jake!" she shouted, rushing in. He was slumped in the corner of the cabin, half covered by a shredded thermal blanket. His wrists were tied in front of him, rope marks deep and purple around his skin. His face was gaunt, lips cracked, and his uniform was torn in places like he'd been dragged. Axel was already beside him, licking gently at his hands, his chest, his face. Jake stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he whispered, "You came?" His voice was rough, barely a breath, but there was no mistaking who he was looking at. Not Cooper, not Mora, Axel, partner. Jake managed a slow, pained smile spreading across his cracked lips. "You found me." Axel nuzzled into his side and let out a soft whine that sounded like relief. Cooper dropped to her knees beside them, hands shaking as she checked his pulse. Weak, but there. Moore was already calling in medevac, voice urgent into the radio. "We found him. Officer down, but alive. Cabin coordinates transmitting now. Send immediate medical." Jake coughed, flinched. They left me here." Cooper leaned in. "Who?" "Jake. Who did this to you?" But he was already slipping again, his eyes fluttering closed, body trembling. Cooper held his hand tight. "Stay with me, officer. You're not done yet." Axel didn't move. He stayed pressed at Jake's side, one paw gently resting on his partner's arm like he'd been guarding him the entire time, even in his absence. Even when no one else believed, he was still out there. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the forgotten cabin, the warmth of reunion bloomed like a fire against the cold. Axel had brought them to him, and now the questions began, because no patrol path went near this place. No map showed its location, and someone with knowledge, had tried to bury Jake Renshaw alive. The rescue chopper cut through the gray sky like a scalpel, blades whirring over the tree line as medics descended in a flurry of snow and static. The cabin was quickly overtaken, lights, stretchers, voices shouting codes over radios, but Jake didn't stir again. He was unconscious by the time they got him out. Axel tried to board the medevac with the team, pawing at the step, but Cooper stopped him. "Let them work, boy," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He'll need you more when he wakes up." Axel didn't growl. He didn't resist. He just sat in the snow, head low, tail still, watching the bird rise with his partner inside. He didn't look away until it vanished behind the peaks. 3 hours later, Cooper stood outside the Pine Ridge Medical Center, her badge clipped to her jacket, Axel at her heel. The winter sun was already setting behind the hospital's frosted windows. Inside, Jake Renshaw lay still, tubes running from his arms, a monitor beeping steadily beside him. The doctors had said it was a miracle: dehydration, bruised ribs, a mild concussion, frostbite on 2 fingers. But he was alive and stable. "He made it," said Mora, stepping up beside her with 2 coffees in hand. Cooper took one without a word. "But something's off about that place," he added. "The cabin. the way it was sealed. That chain wasn't just to keep animals out. Cooper nodded slowly. It was to keep him in. She crouched beside Axel, who hadn't moved from his spot near the glass doors. You brought us to him. You knew. Axel looked up, eyes full of something ancient, older than instinct, something like grief and hope. Then the door slid open with a quiet whoosh. A nurse stepped out. He's asking for the dog. Cooper smiled, stood, and motioned toward the door. Go on, partner. Axel didn't wait. He padded in slow, deliberate steps through the sterile hallway, leaving wet paw print behind him. When he entered the hospital room, Jake's eyes were half open, pale, tired, but they lit up the moment Axel stepped inside. Told you? Jake rasped. He'd come back. Axel hopped gently onto the edge of the bed, curling beside him with practice care, laying his head near Jake's ribs. Jake's hand found the dog's thick fur and stayed there. No words, no commands, just breathing, just trust. The nurse wiped away a tear she didn't expect to have. Cooper watched from the doorway, heart heavy, jaw clenched. Jake Renshaw had survived days locked in a cabin, betrayed by someone who knew his routes, his timings. But what Cooper couldn't stop thinking about was this. Axel didn't return by accident. He crossed miles of wilderness, through a blizzard, with torn paws and shattered command chain, driven only by the belief that Jake was alive, and that he needed him. Later that night, Jake stirred again, this time stronger. Cooper was beside him, Axel sleeping lightly at his side. They thought I was dead, Jake whispered. Who? She asked. Jake swallowed, eyes distant. I didn't crash. Someone was waiting. They cut me off, drugged me, took my radio, chained me up like an animal. Cooper's blood ran cold. Do you know who? Jake didn't answer. He just looked at Axel, and then finally said, I think I trusted the wrong person. It came in flashes, the way trauma always does. Jake lay under the soft hum of fluorescent lights, drifting between the warmth of painkillers and the weight of memory. Axel hadn't left his side, not even for food. Every time the beeping monitor picked up speed, or Jake twitched in restless sleep, the dog's ears would flick, eyes watching, waiting, guarding. Cooper sat in the chair across from the bed, notebook open, pen tapping the margin. She wasn't pushing him. Not yet, but they both knew time was ticking. Jake stared at the ceiling. I took the North Patrol route like always. Axel was on high alert that day. I should have listened. He paused, swallowing hard. I didn't crash. I was rerouted. Cooper leaned forward. What do you mean rerouted? Jake blinked, trying to piece it together. Someone moved one of the boundary markers. At first, I thought I took the wrong path, but the snowmobile GPS showed I was still en route, just further east. You're saying someone led you off trail? Jake nodded slowly. Then I hit something. A spike strip, maybe. Tires blew. Before I could react, someone was there. Masked. Injected something. Fast. I tried to fight, but... His voice trailed off. Axel whined softly. Cooper wrote it all down, jaw tight. Did you recognize anything about the attacker? Their voice? Height? Jake closed his eyes. Nothing. But the cabin, that's what haunts me. It wasn't some abandoned shack. There were signs of use, recent use. A cot, a locked cabinet with pre-packed supplies, a burner lantern. This wasn't improvised. He looked at Cooper now. Really looked. That place was built to hold someone, to break them. Outside the room, hospital staff moved like ghosts. But inside, the weight of what Jake said settled heavy in the air. Cooper flipped her notebook shut. You were meant to disappear. Jake's lips parted in a humorless smile. They nearly pulled it off. Axel stirred beside him, head resting on Jake's hip. Jake scratched his ear gently. He didn't give up. Even when I couldn't move, I'd hear him in my dreams, barking, digging. Because he knew, Cooper said, you two weren't just partners. You were bonded. That doesn't break. Jake glanced at the dog. We've been through heat, storms, and fire. But this was different. Someone in uniform tried to bury me. Cooper hesitated, then pulled out a photo from her jacket. It was a still shot from a trail cam, taken just 2 days before Jake's disappearance. It showed a figure near the cabin, face turned away, wearing department-issue cold weather gear. Jake narrowed his eyes. "That's not me," he said. "No," Cooper replied, "but they had your route logs, your patrol timing, and your clearance." She leaned closer. "Jake, I think whoever did this works with us." Jake exhaled slowly, fists clenching under the blanket, and from his side, Axel growled, low and quiet. It wasn't a warning. It was recognition. Blue Pine had always been a quiet post, remote, cold, mostly clean. The kind of department where trust wasn't a luxury. It was a foundation. Every deputy, every ranger, every handler, they were supposed to look out for each other. But now, with every hallway Jake passed through on his crutches, and every name he heard called on the radio, a shadow of doubt trailed behind it. Axel walked close to his side again, finally clear for light duty after having his cracked paw pads treated. But his gait was still stiff, and his eyes were sharp, like he sensed the threat hadn't passed. And it hadn't, not even close. Cooper met them at the station's evidence room. She looked like she hadn't slept. A coffee sat untouched on the desk behind her, steam long faded. "We pulled a new satellite image this morning," she said, sliding a printed map across the table. "East Sector. Cabin's marked now, but here's what's weird. For years ago, it wasn't on record, not even as an old ranger hut." Jake leaned over the map, meaning someone built it off the books. "More than that," she said. "We dug into old access logs. Only one name shows up with authorized clearance to that sector in the last 6 months. Deputy Raymond Hartley." Jake stiffened. "Hartley? He's the one who told me the ridge was clear. Said the snowpack was too heavy for patrol." Cooper nodded. He was also the first to suggest we call off the search when the storm hit. Jake's jaw tightened. "That son of a—" But before he could finish, Axel let out a low growl. Both of them turned. Footsteps in the hallway. Familiar ones. Deputy Hartley. He strolled in, chewing gum, his badge hanging off his chest like it weighed nothing. "Sergeant," he said casually. "Officer Renshaw. Good to see you up." Jake didn't answer. Axel stepped forward, tail down, body tense. Hartley raised an eyebrow. "That dog's got a long memory, huh?" Cooper watched silently. Axel moved closer, slow, deliberate. He sniffed the air, then sat, not barking, just staring, unblinking. Jake stared, too. "You said the ridge was iced. You were wrong." Hartley shrugged. "Weather shifts. You know that. You said you checked the cabin registry last month, that it was clear." Hartley didn't flinch. "I did." Cooper tilted her head. "Funny, because the station logs show you accessed a lock locker last week, one containing trail cam data. A flicker, barely there, in Hartley's eyes. Jake saw it. So, did Axel. You were out there before me." Jake said, "You moved the marker." Hartley's smile thinned. "You really want to start throwing around accusations, Renshaw? After the condition we found you in? You sure your memory is not playing tricks?" Axel stood. He stepped forward until his chest brushed Hartley's boots. And then he growled again, deeper this time. Cooper stood up. Her hand hovered near her sidearm. "Deputy, we're going to need you to come with us. We got some questions." Hartley's face went still, and that's when Jake saw it. Not fear, calculating, like a man deciding how much longer he could run before the leash yanked back. Hartley backed away slowly. "I don't know what you're getting at, but I'm not saying another word without a union rep." He turned and walked out, but Axel didn't follow. He just stared at the door, for a bristling body still as stone, because he knew, and so did Jake. Hartley was involved, and if they didn't move fast, someone else was going to vanish. That night, the station was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from tension thick in the air, waiting to snap. Sergeant Cooper stayed late, reviewing the logs again. Every patrol Hartley had filed, every piece of evidence accessed, every door he'd unlocked. It painted a picture, one that grew darker with each line of ink. The man had moved with precision, just close enough to protocol to avoid suspicion, just far enough outside it to make things disappear. Meanwhile, Jake sat in the observation room, the low light casting long shadows across the walls. Axel rested at his feet, unmoving, watching the hallway like he was waiting for something or someone. Cooper entered quietly and placed a slim folder on the table. Jake didn't need to ask what was in it. Trail cam footage from Sector 6. 36 hours before your patrol, she said, voice low. Infrared caught two figures loading supplies into a snow sled. One's two bundled ID. And the other? Jake asked. Cooper slid the first still frame toward him. The figure had turned for a split second, caught by the side angle. Hartley. Jake's breath caught in his throat. That's it. That's the bastard. Cooper nodded grimly. He's part of something. We just don't know how wide it goes. As if on cue, a knock sounded on the door. Deputy Morris stepped in, lips thin. You're going to want to hear this. We ran Hartley's work vehicle through GPS pings. There's a stop on his route he never logged. Private land. Old ranger property that was sold off years ago. Coordinates. Cooper asked, already reaching for her coat. About 5 miles north of the cabin. Jake stood too, wincing slightly. I'm coming. Jake, she started. I know the terrain. I know Hartley. And Axel, he'll smell him before we ever see him. Cooper didn't argue, because the truth was, they needed Axel more than ever. The night was moonless by the time they arrived, just a pale haze reflecting off thick drifts of snow. The property was overgrown, fence half collapsed, old shed barely standing. Axel jumped from the vehicle before it stopped moving, nose to the wind, posture tense. He moved like a ghost, low and fast, cutting through brush until he froze in front of the shed. Jake followed, flashlight raised. The beam caught a glint of metal, a padlock. Cooper drew her weapon and signaled. Jake kicked the door in. Inside was a mess of gear. But not just camping supplies, maps, trail markers, satellite phones. A duffel bag of cash. A wall covered in printed patrol logs, including Jake's. And photos. Of him. Of Axel. Of other officers. Jesus, Cooper breathed. This isn't just Hartley. This is an operation. Jake's flashlight swept across the shed and stopped on a fresh trail of footprints in the snow. Heavy, rushed, running. And then a shout. Mora's voice from the other side of the ridge. He's fleeing. Northeast slope. Jake didn't hesitate. Axel, go. The dog took off like a shot. Through trees. Over fallen logs. Up the ridge. Jake sprinted behind him, lungs burning, boots crunching deep. His ribs still screamed from the cabin, but the fire inside him burned hotter. Then a crash ahead. Hartley, running, stumbling, weapon in hand, breath ragged. But Axel was faster. He launched, teeth bared, taking Hartley down in a blur of fur and snow and fury. The man screamed, scrambling, trying to lift the pistol. But Jake was there in an instant. He kicked the weapon away and dropped on Hartley, pinning him to the ground. You left me to die, Jake growled. You chained me like a dog. Hartley spat blood, sneering. You were in the way. That land, worth millions. They would have paid for silence. Cooper arrived seconds later, cuffs ready. You're going to pay for every damn word. As she hauled him to his feet, Jake knelt beside Axel, breathing hard. You did it, boy, he whispered, resting a hand on the dog's neck. You got him. Axel's chest heaved, tongue lolling, but his eyes were sharp, focused, still alert. Because deep down, even now, they both knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The interrogation room was lit by a single buzzing overhead light. Hartley sat cuffed to the table, a fresh gash above his brow courtesy of a tree root he'd tripped over when Axel brought him down. His face was blank. No shame, no fear, just calculation. Like he was still planning his next move. Jake stood behind the observation glass, arms folded across his chest. Axel sat at his side, his ears twitching every time Hartley shifted in his seat. They were both silent, but the tension between them was a live wire. Inside the room, Sergeant Cooper leaned forward, placing a thick folder in front of Hartley. It landed with a heavy thud. Maps, money trails, signed documents, photos of the old cabin, and more than a few names that tie back to you. Hartley smirked, barely glancing at the evidence. You don't know what you're playing with. No, she said evenly, but I know enough. You forged entries, rerouted patrols, and coordinated with someone to use a department resource, Jake, as bait. Hartley chuckled. He wasn't bait. He was a liability. He started asking questions about the extra chopper hours, about the restricted zones being reopened. He was getting close. You could have just warned him off. Hartley leaned back, cold confidence oozing from his voice. And let him blow the whole thing open? Do you know how long we've worked to keep those back trails quiet? Do you know how much money was on the table? No, Renshaw made his choice. He made the right choice, Cooper said. The kind that gets you a medal or killed by the wrong people. Hartley leaned forward, voice dropping. I'm not the top of this. You think you've solved anything, Cooper? You haven't even scratched the surface. Outside the room, Jake exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. He'd heard enough. He opened the door and walked in. Hartley's eyes lit up with something cruel. The dead man walks. Jake didn't flinch. You tried to erase me. In a blizzard. In a shack no one even knew existed. You shouldn't have made it out, Hartley said, grinning. That dog of yours. He's the only reason you're breathing. Jake stepped closer, and Axel followed, silent and looming at his side. I survived, Jake said quietly, because you underestimated both of us. Axel growled then, slow, guttural, a sound that didn't come from training, but from something deeper, the kind of sound that makes your blood run cold. Hartley's smile cracked. Jake leaned in, voice like steel. You see, that's the part that'll haunt you. Not the cuffs, not the sentence. The fact that even when you had every advantage, even when you left me to die, my partner still found me. He remembered. He never stopped. Hartley tried to look away, but Axel took a single step forward, and the sound of claws on tile made him freeze. You should be scared of that, Jake said, because justice didn't come from the system this time. It came on 4 legs. Cooper nodded toward the mirror, and deputies stepped in. Hartley was pulled to his feet, but for the first time, he didn't say anything. His bravado was gone. Jake turned and walked out without looking back, Axel trotting beside him. In the hallway, Cooper caught up. Feds are taking over now. They're opening a full investigation, land fraud, environmental corruption, maybe even human trafficking routes. Jake sighed. Good. But something tells me Hartley wasn't lying. This goes higher. She nodded. Yeah, but we'll be ready. Jake knelt beside Axel, rubbing his head, the dog leaning into the touch. Still want that desk job? Cooper asked, half teasing. Jake glanced down at his partner. No, he said softly. I want him with me. On patrol. On the trail. We still got work to do. Cooper handed him a small envelope. Official department transfer paperwork. Welcome to K9 Recon Unit Bravo, she said. You and Axel are now officially assigned as a tactical recovery team. Jake took the folder, heart heavier than ever, but anchored by purpose. He looked at Axel. You ready to get back out there? Axel wagged his tail once, slow and strong. The sun rose pale and soft over Blue Pine Ridge, casting long gold shadows across the trees as the snow began to melt into spring. The forest exhaled, the kind of slow breath that only comes after storm passes, not just in weather, but in everything that had tried to tear it apart. At the edge of the ranger station, a new patrol unit gathered for briefing. Fresh faces, clean records, each one hand-picked. No more hidden ledgers. No more forged permits. The department had been gutted and rebuilt from the inside, piece by piece. Jake Renshaw stood near the northern fence line, his uniform freshly pressed, his shoulders still stiff from healing ribs. At his side, Axel sat alert, tail curled neatly, eyes scanning the tree line not for enemies, but for peace. Cooper approached with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. You're officially cleared for fieldwork. Full return. Medical sign-off an hour ago. Jake sipped and nodded. He's ready too. They both looked at Axel, who had shifted his weight slightly. Ears perked toward a distant noise in the woods. Just another branch, probably. But still, he noticed. He always noticed. The feds traced a money trail. Cooper said quietly, Hartley was just a pawn. There were bigger players. Developers trying to turn conservation land into profit. Blackmail. Kickbacks. Disappearances. Her voice tightened. You weren't the first they tried to erase. Jake's jaw set. But I was the first to survive. Cooper nodded. Thanks to him. Jake looked down at Axel, running a hand down his partner's thick coat. He never gave up. Not for a second. She smiled. Loyalty like that doesn't get trained. It's earned. Just then, a group of school kids and parents passed the edge of the station on a guided hike. A boy with a plastic sheriff's badge stopped, tugging on his dad's sleeve. Look, Dad, that's the hero dog. Axel turned, ears twitching at the sound. Jake gave a small wave as the boy ran up. Is he really the one who found you? Jake knelt. He didn't just find me. He saved me. Tracked me across miles of snow. Led a whole rescue team back to a cabin no one even knew existed. The boy's eyes went wide. He's like a real superhero. Jake looked at Axel and smiled. He's better than that. He's my partner. As the boy ran off to catch up, Jake stood again, feeling the breeze shift against his uniform, carrying the scent of pine, thawing snow and distant echoes of storm that had finally passed. That night, as the station quieted and the forest slipped into stillness again, Jake stood outside under the stars, Axel lying at his feet. The sky above was clean, no clouds, no static, just clarity. Jake glanced down. Whatever comes next, he said softly, we're ready. Right, boy? Axel didn't bark. He didn't need to. He just stood, turned toward a tree line, and walked beside his partner, into the woods they knew better than anyone. Because now, Jake Renshaw was no longer just a survivor. He was the one who came back. And he would never walk that path alone again. Some stories aren't just about survival. They're about the bond that refuses to break, even when the world turns its back. Jake was left to die, but Axel never gave up. He didn't follow orders. He followed his heart. And in the end, it wasn't the sirens or the search parties that brought Jake home. It was the unwavering loyalty of one dog who remembered where his partner was and who he was. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of what real loyalty looks like, subscribe to our channel, because there are more stories like Jake and Axel's. Stories of courage, of justice, of heroes who don't always wear a badge. Sometimes they walk on four legs.